Never Hike Alone. Never Hike Alone is a fan film inspired by Friday the 13th, made by Womp Stomp Films. It dropped on YouTube on October 13, 2017, and has racked up over 1 million views since then. The story follows Kyle MacLeod, a hiker who stumbles upon the forgotten remains of Camp Crystal Lake while on a solo backpacking adventure. As he checks out the area, he quickly finds out he's not the only one there. It seems like Jason still calls this place home. After a terrifying encounter with Jason, Kyle sprints through the woods but ends up getting injured after crashing into a sign. He manages to make it back to the camp to grab a medikit. While patching himself up, he has to stay hidden from Jason. But eventually, Jason finds him, leading to a brutal showdown where they both injure each other, Kyle getting a machete in his gut and Jason taking a hatchet to the neck. Kyle barely escapes, but the next day, Jason ends up crushing his skull with his bare hands. Just then, it's revealed to be a hallucination, and Kyle is actually safe in front of 2 paramedics, Axel and Denny. Suddenly, Tommy Jarvis shows up. As Axel goes to look for Tommy, Jason strikes, killing him with an axe to the stomach, followed by Jason brutally taking out Denny by smashing her head against the ambulance. Just before Jason can get to Kyle, Tommy speeds away in the ambulance, escaping the killer. Cast and characters: Vincente DeSanti takes on the role of Jason Voorhees. Sean Richards portrays the shadow of Jason Voorhees. Andrew Lady plays Kyle MacLeod. Tom Matthews is Tommy Jarvis. Katie Schwartz plays Denny Morgan, and Robert Dubois is Axel Macaulay. Never Hike in the Snow. Never Hike in the Snow is a prequel to the popular Friday the 13th fan film Never Hike Alone, created by Womp Stomp Films. The plot kicks off with a young hiker named Mark Hill who goes missing, and it dives into how Sheriff Rick Colon, Tommy Jarvis, Mark's mom Diana, and Deputy Alan Mabry respond to the situation and try to handle the crisis. While wandering around and snapping pics of the deserted Camp Crystal Lake, college student Mark Hill finds himself on the run from Jason Voorhees in the snowy woods. He finally spots his car, but as he takes a moment to catch his breath, Jason shoots an arrow into his leg, making it impossible for him to escape. Jason then finishes him off by driving an axe into his mouth and drags his lifeless body back to his shack. Deputy Rick Colon, now the sheriff of Crystal Lake, gets called to the murder scene. He tells his deputy, Alan Mabry, to tidy up the area while he heads over to Mark's mom, Diana. Colon breaks the news that her son is missing and asks if he can check out Mark's room for clues. A distraught Diana agrees, and Colon finds some maps and photos of Camp Crystal Lake on Mark's desk. He leaves without mentioning the photos to Diana, not wanting to upset her further. At the same time, Tommy Jarvis is sneaking around Crystal Lake, convinced that something's off with Jason, which is why he carves Jason's name into Mabry's police car. Colon catches him in the act and arrests him. Meanwhile, Mabry, intrigued by Jason, decides to explore the abandoned Camp Crystal Lake buildings despite Colon's warnings. He doesn't find anything useful, but just as he's about to leave, he spots a light on in another building and goes to check it out. Unfortunately, Jason ambushes him and blows his head off with his own shotgun. Here's the lineup of cast and characters. Tom Matthews takes on the role of Tommy Jarvis, while Vincent Guastafaro plays Sheriff Rick Colon. Vincente DeSanti steps into the shoes of Jason Voorhees, and Brian Forrest portrays Deputy Alan Mabry. Cortland Gordon is Mark Hill, Anna Campbell plays Diana Hill, and Lennon Hobson is cast as Pamela Voorhees. Never Hike Alone. 2. 15 years after the events of Jason Lives, Tommy Jarvis is now an ambulance driver at Wessex County Medical Center. He wakes up from a nightmare about Jason Voorhees and decides to head to Camp Crystal Lake with a shotgun, determined to confirm that Jason is really dead. When he arrives, he runs into Rick Cologne, the new sheriff of Crystal Lake, who scolds him for trespassing and tells him to leave, insisting that Jason is just a figment of Tommy's imagination and that he needs to move on from his past. Later that night, a couple in a tent hear a strange noise and find an injured guy named Kyle McLeod. When Kyle wakes up, he warns them to get out of there before he takes off. Unfortunately, Jason shows up shortly after and kills the couple. Kyle is later discovered by a forest ranger who calls for help. Meanwhile, Diana Hill, a doctor at the hospital, is anxious about her missing son Mark and chats with Tommy about it before he gets called to help the hiker. Tommy arrives at the scene with medics Axel and Denny, and they start treating Kyle, unaware that Jason has just killed the ranger. Jason then attacks Tommy, taking out both Axel and Denny, but Tommy manages to escape in the ambulance with Kyle, and they make it back to the hospital, where Kyle is rushed into intensive care. The following morning, Sheriff Cologne gets word that Tommy reported several murders in the woods the previous night and claims that Jason has returned. Together, she and Tommy discover that Kyle had come across the decayed, severed head of Pamela Voorhees before being attacked. Tommy then talks to Kyle about what he witnessed, convinced that destroying Pamela's head will prevent Jason from returning. Unfortunately, Kyle can't recall the exact spot where he found the head, so Tommy insists they all head back to Camp Crystal Lake to put an end to Jason once and for all. Just as they're about to leave, Sheriff Cologne and his deputies confront Tommy, trying to arrest him for murder. Out of nowhere, the power cuts out, and Jason shows up, having tracked Tommy to the hospital. He takes out Cologne's deputies and some hospital staff before Tommy, Kyle, Diana, and Cologne manage to make their escape. The four of them make it outside and find that Jason has taken out all the cars in the parking lot. Cologne feels really bad for doubting Tommy about Jason's existence, and then the group comes up with a plan to use the spare battery from the ambulance to make their getaway. Cologne decides to create a distraction by confronting Jason, but sadly, he ends up getting killed. The others manage to escape to Crystal Lake, where they find Pamela's head. The next day, the FBI arrives to handle the aftermath, and Diana finds some closure when one of the bodies turns out to be Mark. Meanwhile, Tommy and Kyle bond as Tommy starts to heal from his past. But in a twist, Jason's severed head is seen underwater, seemingly breathing, hinting that he might still be alive. Dylan's New Nightmare. Dylan's New Nightmare is a fan film for A Nightmare on Elm Street 2023, serving as a sequel to Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Set 25 years after New Nightmare, the movie centers on Dylan Porter, once again portrayed by Miko Hughes. He's now dealing with the same entity that tormented his mom, still taking the shape of Freddy Krueger. Directed by Cecil Laird. Plot. About 25 years after the happenings in Wes Craven's New Nightmare, Dylan Porter is all grown up and chasing his dream of becoming an actor in Hollywood, just like his mom. The story kicks off with a wild casting audition, where he's trying out for a role in a made-up Fifth Hatchet movie. Things take a turn when the casting director starts laughing at him, and then, out of nowhere, his assistants take a drastic step. Suddenly, the casting director morphs into Freddy Krueger, who starts tormenting Dylan before he jolts awake from this crazy nightmare. Later, Dylan meets with his therapist, Dr. Sarah Silby, and hesitantly opens up about the dream. Later that night, once Dylan is fast asleep, the creature from WCNN slips out of his bed and into reality, then sneaks into Dr. Seibel's house and kills her. The following morning, Dylan wakes up to see Dr. Sybil's bloody pen sitting on his nightstand, along with his childhood plush dinosaur, Rex. Just then, his phone rings, and when he picks it up, it's his mom on the line, bringing him a wave of relief. The villain. The entity serves as the primary villain in the fan film Dylan's New Nightmare, which follows directly after Wes Craven's New Nightmare. This supernatural, demonic serial killer takes pleasure in tormenting Dylan Porter and has a knack for offing people in really twisted ways. Dave McRae brought this character to life. The entity looks a lot like it did in Wes Craven's New Nightmare, rocking that olive green fedora and a sweater with green cuffs instead of the usual red. Its eyes have diamond-shaped pupils, reminiscent of Demon Freddy from Freddy vs. Jason, and the makeup is heavily inspired by Freddy's Revenge, especially with those deep-set eyes. Robert Englund's presence is hard to shake off. Just ask Jackie Earle Haley. However, Dave McRae, who has experience with fan films like co-directing the Black Christmas tribute It's Me, Billy, does a great job capturing Freddy's quirks, including that creepy laugh.